I gotta be honest with y'all. What is it about the Cold Sorc that people just lose their minds over? Literally a non-issue. I'm rocking 6k DPS Blizz and level 26 Cold Mastery, and I still can't kill shit. I don't see how it's a major issue. The Paladin's Conviction Aura has always broken immunities, and no one is complaining. Honestly, I hope they don't change this. I'm pretty sure Cold Mastery explains what it does. What part of lower enemies' cold resistance don't you understand? They fixed the bug. By the way, instead of fixing this, they should make all other elementals to be able to break too. I mean, Fire Source is literally useless in hell, only for Endariel. Okay, actually, that last one was apparently a prophecy in disguise. Shoutouts to that commenter, they got it in one. What is all this that I'm showing you? Well, it's the comments that were on the video when I covered back when Cold Mastery was bugged and was actually breaking immunities by itself. And back when that was happening, and we tried to point out just how broken only the Cold Sorceress being able to break immunities without any other gear at all would be, there was a lot of weirdly vitriolic pushback. And honestly, that's why I'm so surprised right now. With the addition of Sunder charms, every single character gets to be like the Cold Sorceress was when the game released. But here's the kicker. People are continuing to vastly misunderstand or misrepresent how much power the Cold Sorceress gains from the addition of Sunder charms. So what I hope to do is break it down. I like to think that I did a pretty decent job in my Sunder charm coverage video, but I don't think we went deep enough. So what I'm going to show are the differences in what a Cold Sorceress used to be able to do and what she can do now. Break down why power does not equal places you can farm. And also explain what an end gear game looking Sorceress build, or any build for that matter, looks like now with the addition of the charms. And why Cold Sorceress really is not gaining the power that a lot of people think that she is. So when we're talking about the Cold Sorceress in the addition of the Sunder charm, we're talking very specifically about Cold Rupture. This is going to sunder a monster's immunity. That means if they were immune, no matter what the value was, it's now set to 95 resistance. And then the thing that have so many people up in arms right now is the addition of Cold Mastery. Cold Mastery is very different than the other masteries like Fire and Lightning, and I'll show you those right now, where these skills will actually add percentage damage increase to a skill. Cold Mastery is completely different in every way. So at skill level 34 here, if my Sunder charm is going to be bringing the monster down to 95 resistance, that monster is going to be considered to have minus 90 total resistance. And what does that mean? If we take a look at something like our Ice Blast right now, the Ice Blast skill is going to do, on average, 1100 damage. When a monster has negative resistance to your damage type, you take that number, add it to 1, and multiply it by your damage to see what the total damage they're taking is. So here I have my 1100 damage of Ice Blast, and then I'm going to multiply that by 1.9, which is the minus 90 enemy cold res that they have. And look at that, I'm close to doubling my total damage. So why are people so upset about it? Well, the major problem is that other builds actually have a very hard time of reducing enemies' resistances. So here's the long and short of it. Other builds, if you were to give them absolutely no gear and then give them the Sunder charm, probably still can't capitalize 100% on the ability to now kill every monster in the game. Bringing a monster down to 95 resistance means you're only doing 5% of your total damage output. So if we're doing something like 1,000 damage, all of a sudden we're only doing 50 of that damage. The difference here is that when you give the Cold Sorceress with no gear the Sunder charm, all of a sudden with the rest of her skills, she's doing near or more than her 100% damage output. Cold Mastery starts at minus 20 res and then gives you plus 5 minus enemy res per point. So to be able to bring a monster down to 0 resistance with the Sunder charm, they would need 15 points in Cold Mastery. But that doesn't need to be hard points. You can also get bonus points from plus skills. So if you were to throw on something like a Spirit and a Lore, and maybe find a random +1 skill amulet, you know, the average stuff you could expect to have by the level 75 sorceress, which is required to use the charm. That means you would only need to put 13 skill points into Cold Mastery to be doing 100% of your damage total. Now let's go ahead and look at that exact example I was just talking about. Checking out BT's guide for the Blizzard Sorceress on maxroll.gg, we're looking at the starter variant. This is what we would recommend a level 75 Blizzard Sorceress look like for skills and gear for you to feel good being able to play this character in Hell difficulty and farming some of the starter areas that we recommend. So we have a Spirit Sword, a Lore Helmet using a Stealth with an Ancient's Pledge. In this example, we have +1 to skill with FCR on an amulet, and then random res gear and magic and rare items that you might have found along the way. Down in the charms, all we have are resistances, just an idea of what you could be using. We have skill level 24 Blizzard here, which is doing a whopping 2,800 max damage. And like I said, we have 16 skill points in Cold Mastery, which gets us to that -95. Now, if I were to throw on a Sunder charm here, I could show you what the damage might look like against a monster. You'll see that without the charm, we can't deal damage, right? We have no way of reducing his immunity down below 100%. Throwing on the charm, and it looks like we're doing 100% of our skill damage, and that's because we are. So Blizzard here is experiencing no resistances on Eldritch. The charm brings him down to 95, and then our skill brings him down to 0. And all of a sudden, my Blizzard Sorceress can now farm something she never could farm before, Hell Eldritch. Why would she do this when she could go farm almost anywhere else? So if you don't know, the Ancient Tunnels has always been considered the Cold Sorceress's best farming zone at any stage of the game. It's area level 85, that means that champion and unique monsters can drop every item in the game. Fairly easy to get to, it has a sparkly chest at the end of it, really good monster density, and here's the kicker. In the Ancient Tunnels, there are no naturally spawning physical or cold immune monsters in the game. And even if a unique monster were to spawn with something like Cold Enchanted, Infinity already broke that monster's immunity. But let me go ahead and show you the resistances of those monsters in Ancient Tunnels. So here we're looking at the Plague Bearer. Those are the wrapped mummy type people, and they have 0 cold resistance, even in Hell difficulty. The Invaders are the 6-armed sword-wielding demons, and they also have 0 cold resistance. Embalmed only have 33 cold resistance, but it's the highest value that we've seen thus far. And Horror Mages have 0 cold resistance. Now, why is that 0 cold resistance so important? Well, like I was explaining before, every time that you take a monster below 0 resistance, it's actually a massive multiplier of your overall damage. Going from 0 to -5 resistance might not seem like a lot, but considering the monster takes additional damage equal to its negative resistance, that takes your total damage number and multiplies it by that value. So because we have our level 16 Cold Mastery here with -95 res, that means that every monster that's at 0 is now at -95. Then even the one monster that had 33 resistance is considered as having -62% resistance. And you'll notice that as I go through these targets, the amount of damage that my Blizzard is doing, which is almost double its total value, is significantly higher than the damage that we were doing to Eldritch. Now, why is that so important? Well, because of player settings. Almost every single character, even if they were only barely breaking resistances, can typically kill monsters on players 1 settings fairly easily. You'll see that these Horror Mages only have 3,000 life on players 1 settings. Now, if I bump it up to players 8, you'll see that they have 14,000 life in comparison to what they had before. But doing almost 6,000 damage per second on my Blizzard, it's only going to take me about 2.3 seconds to kill an entire pack of monsters. Now let's look at Eldritch. On players 8 settings, Eldritch has 43,000 life, and since I'm only doing my base damage to him, it's going to take me upwards of 9 seconds to be able to kill him and his pack. I hear what you're saying. You can max out Cold Mastery, Mac. You can put so many more points into Cold Mastery. You can get almost every monster down to -100 res with Cold Mastery. Well, you're right. You're absolutely right. It's going to come at a massive, massive decrease in your overall damage against non-immunes because you have to pull those points out of somewhere. Oh, and the Cold Sorceress could always do that. And that's the major point that I'm trying to make here. For us to be able to max out Cold Mastery, we need to pull 8 points out of somewhere. And since our Blizzard is synergizing with Ice Blast, Ice Bolt, and Glacial Spike, I'd like to not take the points out of there if we can manage it. So I can either lose the mana regen from Warmth, I can lose the survivability of Frozen Armor. None of those are really great options though. I'll probably have to take the points out of some damage to be able to get there. Drop Ice Bolt down to 1 and take a single point out of Ice Blast here. And now I can max this out. So now I've removed 8 points worth of synergy. So I've removed 40% skill damage from Blizzard so that I can max out Cold Mastery. Better outcomes against monsters that are being barely broken by my Sunder charm. But that also means that I'm losing upwards of 300 skill damage off of Blizzard itself. Now, while that is going to increase my damage versus targets like Eldritch who are immune, and it's going to slightly speed up my kill speed against them, let's look at what it does to some of those monsters we were talking about before who didn't need the charm to be able to break them, and we're already at massive negative resistance values. So going back to my Horror Mage example, you'll notice that the time to kill here is 2.63 seconds. That seems weird, right? Oh, but then you realize that that additional minus 35 cold res is completely wasted here. You can't drop a monster below 100 resistance. So for me to be able to capitalize on the Sunder charm being in my inventory and being able to farm everywhere I want to because I will never face an immunity, I'm actually now wasting skill points and losing out on DPS potential against everything that wasn't immune to cold in the first place. Now, another interesting thing that I've been seeing a lot of is, oh, Cold Sorceress doesn't even need Infinity anymore. She doesn't need Infinity. All you need is the charm and to max Cold Mastery. Well, let's talk about why you absolutely still do need Infinity. Infinity is going to reduce a monster's resistances by 85%. So that means that if you have the Sunder charm, it's actually going to bring the monster down to 10% resistance. For people keeping up at home, if you were trying to maintain that minus 85 resistance by putting points into Cold Mastery, that would be 17 skill points worth of Cold Mastery, which is not difficult to achieve on an endgame build sorceress. But we're talking about the gearless, all she has is the Sunder charm Cold Sorceress, weren't we? Plus 17 skills is, I'll go ahead and tell you, it's impossible. So this fantasy where the sorceress just has 17 extra skills sitting around on a skill build that is at minimum with all synergies an 80-point skill build just doesn't cut the cake when we're talking about a level 75 sorceress. Heck, it doesn't even work if we're talking about a level 85 sorceress. Oh, and here's the second part too. That Infinity wasn't only important for your Blizzard, it was also incredibly important for static. Not a lot of people know this, but if you actually reduce a monster's lightning resistance with static, you can actually get monsters below 50% life while using the skill. So when we're talking about boss kill speed, not having an Infinity on your mercenary not only drastically reduces his kill speed and his ability to apply crushing blow, but also means that your static is less effective. Oh, and again, you still need to find 17 additional skill points to be able to dump into Cold Mastery to not need the Infinity. But okay, so now that we've debunked this idea that a Cold Sorceress using the Sunder charm is all of a sudden just going to be minus 100 res farming everywhere she ever wants to do efficiently, when there are much higher value areas that she could farm more efficiently on higher player settings with more magic find because she doesn't have to worry so much about dumping as many skill points into Cold Mastery, let's talk about the end game Cold Sorceress. So here we have the standard variant end game Cold Sorceress. This is what you're expecting to be using to magic find on your end game Cold Sorceress here. So you have a really good mixture of plus skills and magic find. You got your Shaco, your Skin of the Viper Magi, Oculus with Spirit, Amaris, a bunch of magic find across the bottom, and a whole ton of skillers. We have plus 21 skills at this point. Our Cold Mastery is minus 125. Blizzard's doing 8k damage. Ice Blast is doing 4k damage. Now, when we're still talking about something like Eldritch, 43,000 life, immune to cold damage, even with conviction, it's not being broken. So we have to add the Sunder charm. Eldritch is being broken by the charm, minus 85 from your Infinity, leaving over 10 resistance, and that means that your Cold Mastery, which is still being inefficient here, but is over reducing his resistance down to minus 100, and you're finally doing 28k Blizzard damage to players 8 Eldritch. Now, I absolutely agree. It is wicked cool that your Blizzard Sorceress is now able to do damage to a cold immune monster. That's sick. She can literally farm anywhere that she wants. Here's the problem though. That charm does the same thing for every other build. It removes immunities. So you can go farm anywhere that you want, but obviously you'll have different levels of success. Surely the minus 100 res from Cold Mastery here is going to continue to outperform any other build, right? Well, skill damage is upwards of 8k, minus 100 res is going to double that. So our biggest damage output skill here is now doing 16k. Talking about Ice Blast, again, doubling that average damage. We're doing 8k with Ice Blast, feels pretty good. Heck, even Glacial Spike is doing 3600 damage, and that hits in an area, so you multiply by the number of targets that it hits. But let's look at something like the endgame Fire Sorceress and the endgame Lightning Sorceress. So looking at the standard endgame Lightning Sorceress using stuff like Griffins, Enigmas for Magic Find and plus to skills, Maras again, Spirit, plus to skills, FCR, Magic Find, as well as Skiller Charms, your Torch and your Annie. You got your Infinity on your Mercenary. Infinity before would break the vast majority of lightning immunes in the game. And then your gear with facets in it would bring down their resistances even further. So let's go look at some monster that's classically immune to lightning damage. Grand Vizier in the Chaos Sanctuary is naturally lightning immune, but she only has 100 lightning resistance, so Infinity at 1/5 efficiency is able to drop her down to 83% resistance. Bump her up to player is 8 and she's got close to 40,000 life. Now I'm looking at lightning skill damage here, which is taking the average, and it's doing 18,000 damage per second on average. That's taking that skill damage, cutting in about half, right? So 42,000 cut in half, call it 21,000 for average. But we're only doing 17% of that damage per cast. And even still, we're doing 18,000 damage on average per second. Only a 2-second kill speed on a monster that's naturally lightning immune. Oh, and if you're feeling froggy, you could actually run up in there and hit her with Charge Bolt. That's doing 27,000 damage per second against a monster that's only taking 17% of your total damage. Let's go ahead and throw in the charm and see what our damage numbers look like on a Lightning Sorc. And we throw in Crack of the Heavens. So Crack of the Heavens is going to reduce the monster down to 95%. Infinity is going to reduce it by an additional 85%, so the monster only has 10% of their resistance at this point. Oh, and with just a Griffin's with a single facet in it, that monster is now down to minus 15% resistance. And you know what that means? It's a 1.15 times total modifier of your damage versus that target. All of a sudden, our lightning is doing 47,000 damage against a monster that's naturally light immune that you normally could not break until you had Infinity. And throwing on that Sunder charm is doing quite a bit of additional damage here. Imagine if the monster was brought down to minus 100 res, doubling our sheep damage. Now that would be wild. Oh, and don't look at that Charge Bolt damage of 70,000 damage per second against a naturally immune lightning monster. There's got to be some world where the Cold Sorceress is so wildly more powerful than the other sorceresses with comparable gear, right? There's got to be somewhere. Here, I know. Let's go look at the Fire Sorceress and see what her numbers look like against a naturally immune fire monster. So we have a Fireball Meteor Sorceress here, the epitome of the Fire Sorc. Got plus 25 skills using Oculus, Shaco, Chains of Honor here, plus to skills, Magic Find across the bottom, bunch of skillers, still using Infinity. Sheet damage on Meteor is 40,000 and Fireball sheet damage is 20,000. So let's go find a monster that's naturally immune to fire that you could break previously. So we have Galeb Flamefinger here. He's one of the council members. He normally has 108 fire res, so Conviction Ore is only bringing him down to 91 resistance. We're only doing 9% of our sheet damage versus this target. Fireball here is only doing 5,000 damage per second, and Meteor here is only doing 10,000 damage per second. So now we're kind of really starting to see the effects of monsters having high amounts of resistances. And since we're not using something like a Griffin's here, that damage really adds up. And in fact, to make the comparison a little bit neater, let's go ahead and throw in something like a Flickering Flame. Flickering Flame, while giving us additional plus to skills, it's only one more since we had a Shaco before, and it's going to reduce monsters' resistances to fire by 15%. So now, with that Flickering Flame on, you'll see that we're calculating the monster's resistance as if they only had 76 resistance. We're only doing 24% of our damage versus this target. All of a sudden, I'm doing 15,000 damage per second against a monster with 110,000 life, and my kill speed is only 7 seconds. And then if you look at Meteor, I'm doing 28,000 damage per second. That includes the explosion and then the burn damage as long as they stay in the radius. Got a kill speed of about 4 seconds for a monster who was immune to fire res. Already seems pretty good. Let's go ahead and throw on that Sunder charm. Okay, all right. This monster is only considered to have minus 5 resistance. We're only doing 1.05 times our sheet damage against them. My Fireball is doing on average 20,000 damage, and I have a DPS output of 64,000 damage. 1.72 seconds. kill speed against a monster with over 100,000 life. When we look at Meteor, damage output skyrockets to 118,000 damage. Kill speed less than a second. I've had quite an aggressively sarcastic tone here, and it's because I think people are willfully ignoring the numbers when it comes to the early game, when it comes to the late game, when it comes to whether or not a build is still going to be using something like Infinity, what other gear options different builds have. And let me try to wrap it up in a bow, and I'll take a little bit of the tone off. The Sunder Charm absolutely allows a Cold Sorceress to begin farming anywhere that she wants with a decent level of competency, starting with very little gear. So comparable gear across the board, the Cold Sorceress is gaining access to more farming zones than either the Lightning or Fire Sorceresses that we can use as the best case comparison point. A Cold Sorceress is never going to be going in and farming a place where she isn't doing double her sheet damage. And the reason why that is because cold damage does the least amount of damage out of any of the skills that the Sorceress has. They have it do less damage to balance around. One, it's really easy survivability when you freeze and chill monsters around you, and two, cold mastery is coded in the way that it is. So why would you ever go and farm a completely immune monster that you're now doing close to 100% damage against, when you could be farming in areas where you're doing 200% of your sheet damage with less skill points put into cold mastery and more skill points put into damage? You just wouldn't, or at least you wouldn't if you're trying to be efficient in getting the most out of your build. But here's the kicker here. Cold immunes make up one of the highest amount of total immunes in the game. So the vast majority of terror zones have at least one, if not multiple, cold immune monsters in them. So unless one of the Cold Sorceress's best farming spots becomes terrorized, she would much rather run stuff like Ancient Tunnels, Arachnid Lair, heck, even Chaos Sanctuary. Keep this in mind, the only monster that's immune to a Blizzard Sorceress in the Chaos Sanctuary normally is Lord Desace. You just kill his minions with Blizzard, and then you static him down while your mercenary kills him in 2 to 3 hits. You could do that right now without a Sunder Charm, and in fact, Chaos Sanctuary is arguably one of the best terror zones and one of the best farming spots overall in the game, and Blizzard Sorceresses already farmed there without Infinity and without these Sunder Charms. Whereas Lightning immunes actually don't make up a large majority of immune monsters in the game, and even with only doing, let's say, 50% of your total damage, let's say the monster is 50% resistant, you're still out-damaging a Cold Sorceress on similar gear. And the same can be said for Fire Immunes. Although there are more Fire Immunes in the game, the Meteor Fireball Sorceress can go farm the Stony Tomb, top 5 farming zones in the game now that they've made it an area level 85. When the entire name of the game for the Blizzard Sorc is being able to stack a ton of Magic Find because she farms places that don't have cold immunes. That's her efficiency. That's the leg up that she has. I hope that this helps. Really, I think a lot of the panic is just coming out of not sitting down with the numbers, not really considering what it's going to mean to be an efficient farmer with terror zones added to the game. And hear me out here, it's a completely new meta. Everybody who is sharing an opinion or trying to share math or whatever may be completely wrong. It might turn out that there are 5 or 6 terror zones that are so good to farm that that completely redefines the meta. But at least on paper, and in real game, real world experience and examples, the Blizzard Sorceress isn't now somehow so magically far more powerful than every other build that Blizzard needs to completely burn the game to the ground and build it anew. She's the same amount of head that she's always been, which is Cold Mastery is a little bit overtuned. She gets to farm in really valuable places without really having to worry about a mercenary. Oh, and in this example of the Fire Sorceress, wait until you have a Flickering Flame on this character, which just so happens to give you resist Fire Aura, which is actually going to completely nullify the Flame Rift. That's big brain build priority there. And watch her absolutely shatter terrorized Alrash's Tomb, going to be one of the best farming zones in the area. Smashing through Stony Tomb, already one of the best farming zones in the area. Thank you so much for watching this video. I know there was a lot of energy in it, but I'm just trying to match the energy of the community because a lot of people have really strong opinions about this. But again, I hope that this helps, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.